Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the US Futures weekly chart analysis for the week ending 23rd of May 2025. First chart is the US dollar index futures, as usual. You can see that price moved lower this week. Last week, price pushed up and attempted to regain a position back in this longer-term trading range. But there was supply drawn out last week. We noted it at the time. And that was the mid-bar close that we saw here. And it was always likely the market would pull back to some extent. It pulled back to a reasonable degree this week, and it's trading adjacent to the previous lows here now. It's looking vulnerable, and it's threatening to break down, although it hasn't done so yet. So we'll just watch what happens here for now. This week's move lower has certainly opened the door to many of the other associated markets, in particular the currencies, which we'll see later. E-mini S&P, this is S&P 500 index futures. Price moved lower this week. It traded as an inside bar for most of the week. You can see that price has been steadily climbing. It has got supply that's likely to be drawn out from the left here. Highs of the range come through here. So there is likely to be supply in here for sure. Price pushed up last week and it's come back and tested back through the range of the previous bar. Volume was below average, about the same as last week. So there was no serious volume drawn out. And this does leave the door open for an attempt to push higher. It may be just up to these highs initially as the market continues to consolidate and absorb supply before there's any serious attempt to push higher and challenge the market up at the previous highs up here. So I would look for the market to move up like this next week and probably close just below this 6,000 level. US Treasury 10-year note futures, they also closed slightly lower this week. The market's been trading within the range of this down bar for some time now. It's the controlling bar to a reasonable extent. It was on quite high volume. The market did push up off the lows. Saw some moderate supply drawn out as it did attempt to move higher, and it's come back in consolidation mode since then. This week, price traded inside the range of the previous bar for most of the week on an increase in volume. This is an attempt to consolidate by the looks. If that was all supply, the market would have closed lower and most likely closed below the lows of the previous bar. But it didn't do so. It held on. It's closed in the top half of the bar, albeit only just, at least a mid-bar close, on an increase in volume. This is traded volume. So it does look like the market's attempting to consolidate. Some buying supports come in, and I would expect to see some kind of attempt to push higher in response. Copper price futures. Copper price futures, similar to the previous chart, are trading within the range of this down bar. Just moving back a little bit so you can see where we've been. We noted back here that the market was building up strength. Price did break out. It's pushed higher a couple of times in stages before it really stretched higher to challenge the previous highs back here. Supply was drawn out on this bar. In response, the market pulled back. It did stretch lower with an exaggerated spread, and buying support came in immediately. We saw the market move higher in response. Since then, there's been a minor pullback and then 2 weeks of consolidation in response. This week, the market's moved higher, which is pretty much confirming that there's been buying support emerge over the last few weeks, probably below this bar's close in here like this. Buying support's probably emerged in there, and that's allowed the market to push up this week in response. You'll probably see the market test for supply early next week, and then attempt to push higher in response later in the week if trading conditions are favourable, and particularly if the US dollar does break down below those previous lows. Gold price futures. Gold price futures closed higher this week. We've had a bit of a complex pattern emerge more recently. Since price pushed up here, we saw supply drawn out on this bar, no doubt. The market came back in response, but buying support came in almost straight away. The push below this bar's low was only moderate. The next bar was up, showing you that some buying support had emerged. This bar closed well off its high, and that suggests that selling pressure remained in the market. So the market came back again in response. But you'll note that on this down bar, it really did close back adjacent to the previous bar's low. So buying support came in again down here, and that was confirmed this week by another push higher. This time, prices closed at its highs or right up near its highs, and this is the highest recent close. So we'll see if the market attempts to go higher next week if supply is drawn out again. But at this point, it does appear that the supply drawn out on these two bars has been absorbed on these two bars. And if that's been absorbed and removed from the market, price will probably attempt to push higher in response. Silver price futures. Silver price futures are showing no great intent at the moment. Highs of the range come through here, or the older highs. And price has been trading just above those levels on modest volumes, below average volumes. There's no great intent being shown. We noted the market was absorbing supply over these three bars. And this week prices just pushed higher and closed slightly above the highs of this little mini range here. Most likely in concert with the gold market, just dragging it a little higher. This market's not showing a great deal of intent at the minute. It's being moved mostly alongside the gold market. Light crude price futures. Light crude price futures broke down at this level more recently. We saw buying support emerge almost immediately. That was confirmed by the next bar being up. Then there was a period of consolidation, testing for supply in response. We had a 2-bar or 3-bar reversal through here, depending on how you want to look at it. And this week was a further test for supply or consolidation bar, sort of similar to that bar there. But that bar was responding to this bar, and this week's bar is responding to this 3-bar reversal. This market's consolidating, it's absorbing supply. You may even consider it being in accumulation mode. And if this continues, you'll see this market attempt to break out at some point when trading conditions are favourable. Onto the currencies now. This is the Euro-US dollar currency pair. You can see the market's been moving higher more recently. We saw some supply drawn out on this bar, but it wasn't overwhelming. Price came back in response over the last few weeks. And this week, prices reversed with the weakness in the US dollar, moving lower, and prices come back up to the highs of the range. And it's in a reasonable position to issue a challenge to this level, especially if the US dollar continues to move lower. You'll see on the next chart, the British pound, how much stronger this market is acting compared to the euro. If we come back and put those same levels in, you'll see this market, the euro is in here. This market's already broken clearly above these highs. So this market's acting much stronger than the euro at the moment, which is still slightly below these highs here. I would expect this market will test for supply early next week and then respond higher if trading conditions are favourable. And that really means if the US dollar continues to move lower. It's threatening to break down at the moment. If it does break down, this market will continue higher for sure. Japanese yen currency futures. They pulled back in response to a challenge to the previous highs up here. You can see the market moved up to this level. It did draw out some supply here. Price came back in response. There was a period of consolidation here. Little mini shakeout on this bar, and that's been confirmed as successful with an up bar in response. And the market is back almost adjacent to these highs to the left. I expect this market will test for supply early and then attempt to move higher if trading conditions are favourable. And that'll mean if the US dollar does continue lower. Aussie dollar currency futures, similar story. This market, there's the highs of the range. This market did move above a month ago. It came back in consolidation mode, and I expected it would pull back to this sort of area, but it was relatively strong. The market held on around this 64-cent level, and this week the market's pushed higher. Here's the range above. Here's the range above that. And you can see this market traded in consolidation mode in this level, and this week it's pushed higher and up into this next zone above in here. Zone above that likely comes through here. So I would expect this market to trade in this zone here around the 65-cent level and attempt to consolidate a position in there before there's any further attempt to push higher, at least in the near term. Bitcoin futures. Bitcoin futures broke out above the highs of the range this week. Put some lines in quickly. Here was where the market consolidated in the past and broke out and pushed higher. There was a week's consolidation here before the market pushed up to the more recent highs. Supply was drawn out at this level. Here's the lows of the range through here. And that supply eventually won out and price broke down and began a consolidation period down here. Price moved sideways for 7 weeks, absorbing supply before it broke out more recently. And then prices pushed up in response. If you bring this line across now, you'll see the market moved up to this level last week, absorbing supply and removing it from the market. And this week the market has pushed above this highs of the range level, which is an important level in this market. Now, price did close a little off the week's high, which suggests that there was some supply drawn out. You can see the effort it took to break out like this with the increase in volume being slightly above the average. This market may attempt to continue higher, but it suggests that there is still some supply being drawn out, and that means that price will likely come back and test the strength of this breakout at some point in the future. It may not be immediate, but at this point there would be a 50-50 chance price will come back and test the strength of this breakout line. It's an important level, and with a little bit of supply inferred this week to close off the week's high, the market will likely come back to some degree and test the strength of the breakout. This market's notorious for a continued push higher, so it won't surprise me to see the market attempt to move higher. And if supply continues to be drawn out, it will pull back in response. At this point, it's really only a 50-50 chance to do so, but it's certainly a reasonable chance at this point. Overall, the challenge to the highs of the range and the push above it suggests this market does want to move higher overall. And any pullback to test the strength of the breakout will just be that, testing the strength of the breakout before the market gathers itself up and attempts to move higher again in response. Back to the US dollar index just quickly. This is the important market. I'll just go to this chart here. It puts the levels in much more clearly. You can see that the market's rejected the push higher and back into the longer term trading range. Prices pulled back in response, and these lows are now the important level. You've got some last gasp level here that you can put through here like this, but really the important lows are here. These are the ones you want to watch. If they're broken to the downside, clearly you'll likely see the market continue to move lower, even if it was like this, where an attempt to support the market is drawn out before a full breakdown. So really important level just below this 100 level on the chart. Price is vulnerable here and it's threatening to break down. We'll likely see some sort of response this week. There may be an attempt to hold on for a few days early in the week, and then we'll see just how strong this market is. Okay, thanks for your time. See you again next week. See ya.